Hi, this is Leland Chee, creative executive at Lucasfilm, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi with Dan Zehr. This is the podcast you're looking for.
That's an old one.
Old and true and sturdy. One of the best navigational tools ever built.
You see, your home has been purposely hidden from the rest of the galaxy. There is no map to AT-AT.
George Lucas suggested to me something of a samurai warrior, something of a wise man, a kind of monk-like character.
He's stubborn.
Not him. You. I want to see if he'll listen to you.
That would be a first.
I like firsts. Good or bad, they're always memorable.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi. I am your host, Dan Zehr, delighted to have a Star Wars conversation with you. Since May 2013, I've been committed to creating a positive, family-friendly, spoiler-free place for our Star Wars community. Imagine walking into your favorite coffee shop and joining a lively discussion about Star Wars films, Disney Plus live action, animation, books, comics, collectibles, or Star Wars experiences at the Disney theme parks. I want to bring that sense of community to this podcast, the website, special events, live video experiences, email newsletter, and more. Join our Star Wars community at coffeewithkenobi.com and be part of something special. Thank you to the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Check out coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel for a no-cost, no-obligation quote, and let them know Coffee with Kenobi and Dan Zehr sent you. And I'm sure you've heard the news. Mouse Fan Travel and Coffee with Kenobi are going on the Disney Wish this June 16th to the 20th. To find out more and get reserved, because this cruise is filling up, my friends, and I want you to join us and Star Wars fans from literally all over the world as we celebrate our love of this incredible saga together. Find out how to do that on coffeewithkenobi.com/DisneyWish. On today's show, it is part 2 of our ranking of the Disney Plus live action TV series. Last week we did part 1, and today we will give our top lists. I'm so tongue-tied. Fortunately, I wasn't tongue-tied when we recorded this. I'm looking forward to seeing what you think, and be sure to give your list and your ideas for how you would rank these on Coffee with Kenobi's Facebook group at coffeewithkenobi.com/community. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite mug, and let's have Coffee with Kenobi. All right, Greg. By the way, I will say my number 6 is where I start to really love them. 6th and up, I really big fan. Okay, Greg, number 5.
Yeah. And just to kind of put a button on the Book of Boba Fett, Greg, it's one of our From the Desert Comes a Stranger. Yep. One of our biggest downloads as far as any of our breakfast packs. It is top. I've never it's one of those where I'm like, I don't know why, but that one really clicked with folks, and we also had a great crew for that one. We had a big panel for that one, but like
that's
I said,
when Cad Bane shows up.
Mm-hmm. And it just really we really did good on that one. But at any rate. So number 5, and like you said, now we're starting to get into, and it gets a little tougher to go to compare one to each other, but I have Mando season 2. And mainly because it really continues the great theme of it's continuing this story, and we're building up, and each one kind of builds on the other one as Grogu and Mandalorian do this journey. And they, I found it really good. And this is kind of where I put it, because there's still a lot more up there. And we've kind of talked a lot about how Mando works, but it's sad now that we don't have Carl Weathers as Grief Karga. That'll be coming up in, but going back and seeing shows he's in, you're going, oh man. And of course at the end you have that huge payoff, and of course it dips into nostalgia, but who didn't just go nuts to see Luke Skywalker be Luke Skywalker that everybody was clamoring for, that we heard kind of ad nauseum after Last Jedi. And you're going, well, this you want it, here it is, and you got it in spades. And so I really liked this being here. I felt this really was good. I think obviously there's still some more Mando out there, but I think this fits well at this slot.
Love it. Okay, a nice surprise. This is fun. This is really gonna really get into the nitty gritty. Dr. Cass, you're number 5.
Also, because purely for my 9-year-old who is fast asleep upstairs, I hope anyway. Next on my list is Skeleton Crew, which I'm a little surprised I'm the first to get to it, but I think that's wonderful, and I'm excited to hear how long until you all talk about it. But I think the strength of Skeleton Crew was the same as its weakness. It was self-contained. It was separate. It was its own thing. And I think that was beautiful and wonderful. But if I want those real big Star Wars vibes, I got to have a little bit of my Ion Cannon mind kind of connecting things and pulling things in. So really just, it's also fresh, so I can't even say whether I'll revisit it a lot. But I ended up watching every episode 3 times between show prep and, watching with my son after school. He's always like, Dad, why did you watch it at 9:00 and not wait for me today? And I say, oh, well, show prep. Greg McLaughlin said I had to. I'm sorry, son. He said his content, then my love for my child. So I really enjoyed it. I think it was a ton of fun. And it's been a nice kind of breath of fresh air. I think in a lot of ways, it's what the fandom needed right now, is just something light and kind of full of whimsy and good times. And it was kind of genius to take Amblin classic Goonies and mix it into Star Wars. That chocolate mixed with that peanut butter, and it was mighty tasty.
Excellent. I love it. Always the king of the metaphors. All right, Bob, you're number 5.
All right, my number 5 is Obi-Wan Kenobi with an asterisk. Not the asterisk on Obi-Wan Kenobi, an asterisk on the show. So let me call your memory back. I'm not sure if you guys were there or not, but I was at Celebration in Anaheim when it premiered. So we got to see episode 1 and 2 in a big room, in a big screen with other Star Wars fans. And then that night, we went back. My brother was a cast member at Disney at the time, and he got us a hotel room at the Grand Californian. So we were staying at the Grand Californian. And he was like, I'm really tired. Can you get the pizza? And I'm just going to go up to the room. And I said, yes. And I went back up with the pizza. And I went back in there. And he's like, you're not going to believe this. I just ran into Ian McDermott. He's right. He's staying on our floor. And I was just like, and I went to get your pizza. The memories around that were so huge that I can't think about Obi-Wan Kenobi without thinking about the memories of seeing it the first time. That really had an impact. Not so much the Ian McDermott part, that's just a fun story, but the seeing it with other people. And, there's just something magical about seeing Star Wars with other people. It was actually Acolyte, the first couple episodes of Acolyte I saw at the Chinese theater for the first time with a bunch of other Star Wars fans. And that had a big impact on me. So it is interesting when we're talking about the Disney Plus shows that are meant to kind of be watched in smaller communities or solo versus the large group. Some other things I really like about Obi-Wan, though, is that first moment. Well, through the entire advertising of the show, we saw through the trailers young Luke, right? We saw young Luke all the time. So we knew that young Luke was going to be involved. But it wasn't until in that first episode when they cut to that long establishing shot of the Swiss Alp Mountains, and my brain went, it's Alderaan. And I was like, oh my gosh, Leia is around now too. And then it's like, wait, we're going to get to see Leia as a little girl. And then for her to wind up being such an integral part of the series, I just loved that. I know other people had some trouble with that, but I just loved Leia's character in this show. I thought she was fantastic. Last thing about Obi-Wan was I feel like a prequel, for a prequel to really work, it needs to make the original better. And I felt like that saber battle between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader and the last battle that they had. And when Anakin says, you didn't kill Anakin Skywalker, I did. To me, I saw Obi-Wan actually see Anakin die in that moment. And so I felt like when he told Luke that Darth Vader betrayed and murdered your father, he wasn't just certain point of viewing Luke. He really believed that that was the truth. That was the reality in Obi-Wan's mind, and that made that work better for me. The asterisk is this. I know that they originally developed this to be a movie and not a TV show. I think it would have worked better as a movie because I did feel like it kind of stretched out a little bit longer, and I wish it had been, 2-hour movie. But woulda, coulda, shoulda. It's still my number 5.
And the way you explained the idea of a certain point of viewing or not, that was great. I never thought of it that way before, so thank you for that. That's cool. That is very cool. I'm not going to say, but one of you has an excellent poker face. I'm not going to say anything more. Okay. My number 5 is Skeleton Crew. I loved Skeleton Crew. It was what I think I needed. I wanted to be reminded that Star Wars is about joy. It's about fun. It's about escapism for your family. It doesn't and shouldn't take itself too seriously. It should be something that is escapism. I want to think, I want to laugh, and those things happened. The cast was endearing. They actually developed, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone, including Sir Alec Guinness, but I would say that Jude Law's performance, I would put as perhaps the best acting performance in the history of Star Wars. It is fantastic. It is nuanced. There's a vulnerability. There's a malevolence. There is some charm. It's just fantastic, and you cannot keep your eyes off of him. He is that good. I love Skeleton Crew. So that's my number 5. Okay, Greg, we are down to the top 4. The top 4. This is going to be. Oh boy, I actually don't know. I haven't been writing down what everyone's been saying. I know some things haven't come up yet, but I'm looking forward to hearing how they are explained. All right, Greg, number 4.
This one's going to really hurt. So since this is probably the last time I'll get invited on this program, I'll just by saying I'm going to die on this hill. But I could, when I went through the rankings of what I thought, this is where I put Ahsoka. And it was because the characters and the cinematography really carried it for me. Now, being a huge Rebels fan, and if we were throwing animation in there, Rebels would be even higher on my list. But to see these characters back, and it's been a long time, we didn't really think we were going to see them again. Now, you could call this Rebels Season 5 if you want to. I know there was some scuttlebutt out there. But what I would say, and even for someone who loved Hera, Kanan and Hera together, Hera was a tough one to kind of eventually warm up to. But I would say that Sabine knocked it out of the park. Thrawn knocked it out of the park. We had Chopper. We had everybody in this. We had Jason. And that just really brings it. And so this is one where I'm going to wear my nostalgia all over this ugly sweater I've got. It's a brown sweater for those of you listening to the podcast. But I'm just going to say that for me, when I sit there and go back, I'm like, I enjoy watching this program. I loved Morgan Elsbeth in this. I love, Shin Hati and Baylan Skull really connected with me. So for whatever reason, of all those things, it just really clicked with me. And I'll say, like, unabashed, it has some issues in it, but I would say, like when we saw Ezra and Eman Esfandi, that's Ezra, and you're just like, yep. And so there are things that like as much as we saw, like as we've seen some characters come from animation into live action, and this really clicks off a lot. And so I would say the criticisms that you guys have made really are sound, but this is one where I'm like, I can't hide it. I just really loved this show. And I'm not afraid to put it as my number 4.
Nor should you. I love it. I mean, we can't weigh someone's heart. We're not. This is an Egyptian mythology. It's fantastic. I love that. I love it. Dr. Cass, you're number 4.
So in terms of my list, I was very quick to fill in the bottom, very quick to fill in the top, and it was these couple in the middle. I really struggled to put them in order, and of them all, my number 3 and my number 4. So number 4, I settled on Mando season 1, and I think both the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian are fantastic, and when I really think back to season 1. I give it's actually how I feel a lot about A New Hope. A New Hope kind of pales in comparison to Empire Strikes Back in quite a few ways. But I have to curve it because if you don't do A New Hope, you don't get the rest of it. And I do think in terms of our conversation tonight, if Mando season 1 hadn't worked, they would have scratched off these budgets and stopped this experiment. So I do give Mando season 1 a lot of credit. I do really like its own corner of the galaxy. It starts to cut out and build up. What limits it for me, and again, I completely agree. I think Bob said it first, and you both agreed. Like there was a big jump up here for me, and when we get up to here, what limits it just a little for me is I'm not a scum and villainy guy. I'm a Jedi guy, and that's the Star Wars that speaks the most to me. And so I felt like, while this was the coolest we've ever seen a bounty hunter, that's just not my favorite part of Star Wars. So it limits it a little bit, but boy, I'll never forget the surprise of Grogu and Baby Yoda at the time, and didn't know such a thing could happen, and certainly won't forget kind of many of the surprises along the way in that journey. But I would say Mando season 1 starts really high and kind of decreases over its run for me in a lot of ways, and maybe one I'll talk about sometime soon does the opposite.
Now there's a little hook. I love that. Bob, number 4.
Number 4 for me is Skeleton Crew. And Dan, I'm wondering how you hacked into my phone to look at my notes, because bullet by bullet, everything you said is exactly what I loved about Skeleton Crew. It was fun. Jude Law's performance out of this world. The mashup of the Amblin with the Star Wars is great. Here's what I have to add to the discussion. And this one is personal for me. I really related to the kids just because a part of my own story, like Wim as a kid who is passionate about something, but dad to start off with doesn't support what he loves. That was actually my story with Star Wars. When I became a big Star Wars fan when I was 10 years old, my dad didn't quite know what to do with it. I think it kind of freaked him out a little bit. And that was an issue between us until later we were able to resolve that. And now he loves watching the Star Wars shows. So I related to that aspect of it. I also related to Fern as a gifted kid. I was a gift, quote unquote. You can't see my air quotes, folks. My gifted kid growing up with this huge weight of expectations and then not really knowing what to do with them and kind of rebelling with them. It was a lot of my story. So I saw a lot of myself in the kids and I really related to it. The other thing that I just loved about the experience of Skeleton Crew, and this is a total meta, I just love over the last few months that everybody seemed to like Skeleton Crew. It was so nice to have a Star Wars project where there wasn't the vitriol. Like everybody seemed to like it, and it just made me happy. It made me happy. It reminded me of those glory days back right when The Force Awakens was coming out, and I was walking through Disneyland and everybody was wearing a Star Wars shirt, and it felt like the universe was configuring itself for my enjoyment.
And as it turns out, it was. And and all of ours. It was that was a very magical time. I love how you explained that. Okay, 4 for me is Obi-Wan Kenobi. When I was talking to Tom Gross about this, and he goes, "What about Obi-Wan?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I forgot about Obi-Wan Kenobi." It came out, as you said, during Celebration, the last American Celebration that we had in Anaheim, and I'd forgotten about it. So I went back and did the things I did with the other series. Boy, was this fantastic! The ad of a young Leia. And she kept her character, her sass, her guidance, her wisdom, her precociousness. It was all there. I will always treasure this series because this is the one that I got to actually have Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen on the show. I got to make Hayden Christensen laugh because I asked him when he was walking around as Darth Vader, did he hum the Imperial March to get in the character? He thought that was pretty funny. And it was just really good. And the fact that we got to see Darth Vader on screen as Darth Vader, doing his Darth Vaderousness things with James Earl Jones, the fight scene with Reva, where she reveals that she's been plotting just to try to kill Anakin / Vader, and he just doesn't even. He just completely discredits her while he's fighting her. He doesn't even take her seriously. The escape with the ship. There's just a lot of great moments. I don't really necessarily know that I love how much we got to spend with young Luke, and I'm really not crazy about Vader's conversation with Palpatine in the last episode. I have to do a lot of work to make that work, and I don't necessarily love that. But maybe there's things that I'm just missing, and I'm happy to have someone explain to me, which is totally fine. That being said, I had a blast with the episode or the season. All right, Greg, we're back to you with number 3. These top 3, these are tough to kind of balance out and rank them 1, 2, 3. At least they were for me. So where are you on your number 3?
Well, it's interesting that you say it because these 3, I think, all are some of the best television series in the Star Wars Disney Plus era. I think these all really executed incredibly well as far as like the pacing, the time, and how they tried to tell the story. And it's amazing that my number 3 is Mandalorian season 1. And, you get that introduction to a new character, and right away, go back and rewatch Mando season 1, and it goes down so smooth. Everything you need to find out about this character, and then you go through his journey, watch him with the client. You see Dr. Pershing, you see all that, and at the end, that big reveal that you can't. There's only been a few times in our Star Wars lives that we have seen that kind of shock and surprise, and that we were, one of them, of course, is The Empire Strikes Back. If you happen to be in a theater at that time, but I think this one, nobody saw that coming, and that's what makes it really special. We got to see the volume, like I mentioned before, but in this case, when I compare the other 2 against it, with some of the sets and the cinematography and all that, it just finds itself here, not through any fault of its own, but like, hey, bronze is still a medal in my book. But I like season 1, and like Greg Cass said so well, if they don't knock it out of the park in season 1, we don't get a lot of this other stuff. And so we have a lot to thank for Mandalorian season 1. And how about the rifle coming from the Christmas special? That was kind of the first of many Easter eggs that we have found and enjoyed as they've pulled from all different factions of legends and this and that. And it shows that they get it. They may not execute it to our liking all the time, but they get it. And that's what's fun about these shows. And that's where I find it. Mando season 1, number 3.
Here. Well said. I did not expect that. All right, Dr. Cass, number 3.
One of my favorite behind-the-scenes moments in any recent Star Wars documentary is Jon Favreau proudly showing off the rifle to George Lucas and saying, "Look, we made it. It's from the holiday special." And George just doesn't care. He's like, "Okay, good for you, buddy." But a great shout out and a moment for that. My bronze medal is Mando season 2, and for me, these top 3 are about moments. And I remember this Mando season 2 premiered not long after we moved into our new house. And I remember this was at the time where I had to watch at 5 a.m. And so I had to get it in before work. And so I would get up, set the alarm early, go downstairs, plug my AirPods into the Apple TV so that nobody could hear what I was doing. And I just remember, particularly the finale, seeing wait, that was an X-Wing. Wait, was that? No, it couldn't be. It couldn't be. And then just pumping my fist, silently screaming alone, tears running down my face in my living room. And that's as high as I've felt in one of these shows, and so I really, this is the season that I think just kind of built up to a beautiful conclusion. I did struggle a lot with Mando season 1 and season 2 because I think, it's a little rockier along the way. But I'm also, as I alluded to before, I'm a child of the dark times. So seeing the Dark Troopers and seeing, these other hints of things that we've only ever read books about, Tython, which came from the Old Republic video game, all these little things. I understand fans who say, it didn't work, they were doing too much. But for me, I'll take it all. It was great, and it was a wonderful journey. Plus, a Mon Calamari in a sweater. Come on. What else could you ask for?
A cable knit sweater, yeah.
I bought stock in J. Crew after that. Bob, you're number 3.
I'm also going with Mandalorian season 2, and similar. The the moments are super high, but this is what I want to talk about. The expectations were super high going into this, right? Mandalorian season 1 was a surprise hit. So was the sophomore season going to land? And I felt like they really, really delivered. That first episode, The Marshal, with Timothy Oliphant as Cobb Vanth, was one of my favorite episodes of any of the Disney Plus shows. I just thought that was a great story. Then just to see Katie Sackhoff as Bo-Katan, and it gets a little of the meta, but knowing the story of her voicing the character in animation and then having the chance to bring it into live action. And I've always been a Katie Sackhoff fan. I love that. And of course, Rosario as Ahsoka, like just unbelievable guest stars that we had this season. And then, like you said, that finale with Luke was amazing. I felt like, again, at the end, I was also absolutely in tears. I cry at a Kleenex commercial, but still, I just felt that moment, that touching moment between Mando and Grogu, and watching him go with Luke. To me, as much as, I did like season 3 and I like continuing the story, I think I would have been happier had the Mando and Grogu story ended at that point. I just feel like it would have been richer. Not that I'm not going to go see the movie next year when it comes out, but that was a magical moment and absolutely beautiful. So Mando season 2.
Fantastic. My number 3, I didn't expect to put it as high on my list, but I have to be honest with myself. When you're talking about a quality of storytelling, because that is, if not the most important thing for me, second most important thing for me, and it's very, very close, is Andor. Andor, I struggled with Andor for a while because I didn't watch it with Mason. It's the first Star Wars series I did not watch with Mason. I felt like it was way above where he was at as a I think it was 7 or 8 when it came out, and there's some heavy stuff there within the first 10 minutes of the first episode with what's happening in the locations. The main character committing murder. I decided I'm not showing him this. Happy I screened it before I did, and I did take a little bit of time to get into it. But once we get into the prison, Aldhani, and the prison escape, which to me, those episodes are perfection. They are storytelling perfection. I think, and I'm not trying to be silly here, I think if Clint Eastwood made a Star Wars series, it would have been those episodes in the prison. And not just because of Escape from Alcatraz. I just think there was a depth and a breadth and an adult level of integrity, character integrity there. I don't often use the word film grammar to describe Star Wars, but there's a ton of film grammar in this that is just amazing. Andy Serkis. I thought the payoff at the final episode was brilliant. I feel like they didn't fall into this series wasn't about Star Wars nostalgia. It was about insanely good storytelling that actually adds to the canvas and expands it to a different way. This was the series that showed Star Wars can be more for adults. And there's a payoff because you still got that sense of wonder. This had to have Star Wars on it. Skeleton Crew didn't. Like, Skeleton Crew was good in spite of the name Star Wars. This was good because they took the sandbox and they used an architect to build a sandcastle. And it was awfully, awfully good. That's my number 3. Okay, Greg. Thank you. Greg, you're number 2.
And it's sort of interesting that, this, no one was more surprised at me as where I put this. But what made it easier when we kind of like broke down some of our internal scoring on this, that it just ticked off a lot of the boxes. But this is where I put Skeleton Crew. And like I said, no one was more surprised than me to see this there because of a lot of these other great shows that I admit. But as we kind of talked about on the podcast, I'm like, I never at once worried about how long this was. This felt right. Like the pacing of the story was incredibly good. Jude Law, as you so well put, just really knocked it. And there was so much there to to just give. It was just a masterclass every time he was on. And like Tom Gross had mentioned, like you and Father Jimmy were doing it, I had some reservations about the kids and how they would act, but I'm like, right away, they just established it like, we got this, you know, and a lot of the trappings. And it's kind of funny because like when Greg and I kept talking about some of our theories, and like we got the tinfoil on, we were way off in left field in some cases, but it was fun. And it just really, every episode kind of spawned, and there was some great payoffs, and there was a lot of mysteries. And I do admit that there are some things at the end that they probably had to kind of cut short. But at the end, I felt very satisfied. And I'm like, this is a good TV show that I don't know how they can really repeat. But if this was a one and done, I'm perfectly fine with it. There's a lot that they could do. I'd love to see where some of these characters were. But, the introduction of Kim really was awesome. To see a B-Wing, live action B-Wing with guns a-blazing, that was awesome. The pirates were really fun. And it just, some of the drapings of it, and to borrow from Bob, this did feel like some of the comic books. And it was kind of, it got crazy in a couple of things. We got the pirates, and maybe they leaned a little too far into it. But unlike where the mods were in Book of Boba Fett, this really, I'm like, okay, I can kind of buy into this, because it just went maybe instead of going 2 or 3 steps ahead, this kind of just leaned a little more into it. But I was surprised, and it'd be fun to kind of revisit this ranking system in about 6, like after Andor, when we're deep into 2025 after Andor, because we're all going to be like on an Andor high for a while. And if we'd done this after Andor season 2, would we be talking about the same thing? But this is where I kind of find it. It's very surprising, so well done. And to talk about what Bob said, so fun that everybody seemed to be on board with it. Woohoo!
And isn't it fun to look when you take a step back and look at these series like that, and you kind of reflect on how they hit you emotionally and intellectually? It's very satisfying. So I love that you found some joy in this activity. Greg, your next one.
I think you knew it was coming. This is where I put Kenobi. And so it's about moments, like I said. And I think, Star Wars fans who are our age probably had moments where being a Star Wars fan made you lonely. And I had some of these growing up. And I'm certainly not a victim, and I wasn't bullied in any way in the serious ways we talk about. But I grew up in the smallest of small towns in New Hampshire. We had one stoplight, and it blinked. It didn't even cycle. It just blinked. And so sometimes being the nerdy kid in that town was very lonely. And I felt like if there was a bright center to the universe, I was on the planet that it was furthest from. And for me, I learned tonight that Bob and I watched the Kenobi premiere together, because I had an absolutely magical time at Celebration Anaheim, because I got to be at the bright center of the galaxy for just one shining moment. And me from Nowheresville, New Hampshire, who had just suffered through an incredibly difficult pandemic like we all did, and who was a hair's breadth. COVID was in my house when I was preparing to leave for Anaheim. And thank God it didn't spread to me, and I got out, and my wife was quarantined, and the kids were safe. But so I barely made it by the skin of my teeth. I get to hear John Williams perform a world premiere theme song for my favorite Star Wars character of all time. Then he throws in a little bonus and says, "Oh, you like Indiana Jones too? Let's just bring Harrison on stage and throw in one of those, just because you're well behaved." And then I got to walk a red carpet, and I understand that it was in some ways a fake red carpet, or it wasn't like a premiere in some ways, but it was incredible, and it felt so special. And then on top of all that, the show absolutely delivered for me. I don't disagree with anything any of you said about some moments of poor writing. Hiding Leia under your trench coat was very, very silly in the moment. I don't agree. I don't disagree about muddy effects, but the moment that will stand out for me for all time is Obi-Wan on that landing platform, looking Leia in the face and saying, "I know who your father was, and I know who your mother was," and telling her what she can never know, and yet what we all know. And the performance Ewan gives, and the way those words hit so hard and make me cry. Every time I rewatch that scene, I've watched Kenobi, I think 6 times through. I keep going through it. I have the 4Ks, and I just kind of burn through it and go around. And I think it's barely visible behind me in the shadow. I just got to get the bragging in when I can. I was the first person to ever take a Hasbro T16 Skyhopper to Grant McFeely and get young Luke Skywalker to sign my T16 Skyhopper.
Cool.
I'm sure he signed many more since. But I got his autograph on that. It's always weird when you go ask a child to scribble on your own toy, but it was really great and really special. So it's Kenobi for me. Totally understand whoever doesn't agree, but I'm not here for it. I'm voting with my heart.
You didn't even talk about the Pringles can.
The Pringles cans.
What better than Star Wars to bring memories? I still think Star Wars is the only movie I've seen at a theater where people want to take their picture by the poster. And what you just said, Dr. Cass, about all those things that happened because of Celebration, that premiere, and those moments it gave you, got me a little choked up. That was great. And yes, if you were wondering, if you were keeping score at home, Dr. Cass is who had the great poker face, because I knew when Obi-Wan came up earlier, you were a lock, my friend. Okay, Bob, you're number 2.
Okay, we're on 2. I got so caught up in Greg Cass's story. I was like, wait, where are we? That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all that. Mandalorian season 1 is what I slot at number 2. And, it was funny. We were thinking about the log lines when we first heard them for the show, right? So Skeleton Crew, the first log line I heard for it was, kids get lost in the Star Wars universe. And I'm like, And then I loved it, right? The log line that I had heard for Mandalorian was Lone Wolf and Cub in space. And I was like, it's the Mandalorian and that's what you're going to do with it? Really? But then we had that magic moment. So I was actually back in Chicago with my Learning Geeks podcast partners. We were all live the night that it premiered. And so we said, we're going to record an episode of the Learning Geeks, and then we're going to watch it together, and then we're going to do a Star Wars after show about The Mandalorian. And so we're sitting there watching it, the 3 of us together, and it gets to that last moment where the bassinet goes up and you see the pointy ears, and I go, is that a baby Yoda? Not knowing that Baby Yoda would be what he was known for, but is that a baby Yoda? And then, of course, the scene where, they touch the fingers. And it's just like, oh, my gosh, this was magical. This completely worked. This was fantastic. So I absolutely loved that moment of season 1. Greg, you were talking a little bit about bringing in some of those old Easter eggy things. I loved not just the rifle from the holiday special, but the fact that he was vaporizing Jawas with them. They were blowing them into oblivion. And I realized from that moment, I don't think that's something that anybody in Star Wars would have done up until that point. And he was almost saying, he being Favreau is who I'm calling it here, this is in the world, but not of the world. This is very much Star Wars, but it's my interpretation of Star Wars. And I know that sometimes Mandalorian gets a lot of flack for people saying, oh, it's just Favreau and Filoni pulling out their action figures. And, it's the stories that they made up when they were kids. I'm good with that. I am all here for it because I did that exact same thing when I was a kid. The last moment, though, was the finale, the finale of season 1. I got up that morning. I made a Tatooine breakfast for my family. I made Satsuka for the suka with the eggs. We had my kids are all adults now, so we actually had Tatooine sunset cocktails. Yum. And we watched it together as a family. And that was just a wonderful, magical moment. So Mandalorian season 1, the very last thing I want to touch on with it was the music. I love the music. I love Ludwig's music for it. It's not John Williams. And at first it catches you by surprise, but it works. It just works. And so I'm all here for it.
Love that. All of your number 2s are great. I feel good about mine as well. And I knew 1 and 2 easily. These are the only ones, and 8. I knew 8's hella easily too. My number 2 is The Mandalorian season 2. Between these first 2 seasons, Mason and I did Mando mornings. And when they came out, we'd wake up extra early. I'd make his breakfast. I'd make my breakfast. I'd make the coffee the night before. I line everything up downstairs in our basement. I'd turn the TV on. I'd go in and wake Mason up. He'd get his clothes ready for school. We'd run downstairs and we'd eat and watch these shows together. And every day, every week, guys, some of the most wonderful moments I could get choked to know. Some of the most wonderful moments I've had with that little boy who's not as little anymore because of that series, the first 2 seasons. And season 2, while it was pretty much a guest star of the week, there were a lot of wow moments. The only one that was spoiled for me was Ahsoka, and not because someone directly spoiled it, because it was called the Jedi. I'm like, well, geez, duh. And then she showed up, and I felt like her first on-screen live-action appearance was a little anticlimactic, and then it wasn't. And I thought Rosario Dawson was absolutely transcendent as Ahsoka, more so than maybe in her actual own series. It expanded the lore. There's some fantastic the episode where they break into the vault so they can find the coordinates for Moff Gideon's light cruiser, and Din Djarin has to take off his helmet as Pedro Pascal, and everything there with Miggs Mayfeld. I mean, there's some great storytelling moments. And here come the goosebumps again. The final episode when Luke shows up that no one knew about, I maintain that is the greatest pop culture moment that I have experienced since I Am Your Father. That blew me away like nothing else. I did jump and scream like Michael Jordan came out of retirement and he was 27 years old again. I could not have been more excited. I was jumping up and I kept saying, that's Luke Skywalker. That's Luke Skywalker. And Mason was looking at me, part happy and part like, what, is my dad losing his mind? It put me on a high for weeks, guys. It was just nothing like it. I don't know that it will ever be topped. I don't need it to be topped, by the way. It was just fantastic. Everything I loved about this fantastic show, and the way it was a love letter to Star Wars, but it wasn't a gimmick, and it could have very easily been. I just couldn't have loved it anymore. It's season 2 of Mandalorian is my number 2. Okay, our top choice of all the Star Wars Disney Plus live action shows. There can only be one, number 1. Greg, what is it for you?
And I want to say that this has probably been tops of my list ever since it came out, and on our score sheet it was across the board perfect score for me. But it was Andor. Thankfully, season 1. We're going to get a season 2, but you can't complain when a rock star, the Gilroys, write it, and then of course with Diego Luna just grand slamming this one. But all the actors that are in it, everyone from Andy Serkis to Stellan Skarsgård to Forrest Whitaker to Fiona Shaw is Marva. I mean, the characters in this were so deep. Everything was just so well done. It looked fantastic, but it didn't really it didn't have to lean in on too much of the Star Warsy stuff, right? You didn't have to have the tropes of the lightsaber or the Jedi. You really just had a group of regular people who were forced to kind of come up with. But I'll just say it. One of my favorite characters, Edie Karn, Cyril Karn's mom, because it was just one of those things where it was so unexpected. But her scenes with Cyril, and I really love Cyril as much as I loved Sergeant Linus Mosk, who sat there and had to tip on that flask at the times, and you're going, that's like real people out there. That's be like, you could see the flaws and everything like that, and just everybody, Denise Go as Deidre Miro, and you're just like, all these actors are just so well put there, and they just are so fleshed out that when you get through and you see Marva give that speech at the end, and you see BMO there, like getting kicked over, you're like, I want to start throwing some bricks because like you kicked over the droid. But it was so much fun, and there was a lot to it. And, now to think about that many episodes of a Star Wars series, you're like, wow, that's so many. And it's going to be a real shame when this series is over, because I think Andor, we're waiting for it, but it's going to come and go so fast. And you're going to go, man, on the one hand, I know you probably couldn't have realized all those series for that. But I think when you look back and you go, this was a special moment for streaming Star Wars television. Just soak it in, just because, some of us, like I said, are a little older, and Rogue One hit at that time going, we were looking for something with a little more meat in it. And this was a TV show that just delivered across the board. What more could I say?
Home run. Well, very, very well said, as always. Dr. Cass, you're number one.
Well, if I had this list to do over, I would get up early every day and I would fight. So I have also picked Andor for my number one. And I actually think, Dan, you articulated when it was your number three, one of my big reasons, which it demonstrated Star Wars could be something different. And in the Disney era, my taste has been The Last Jedi and Andor kind of as the tops for that exact reason, that nostalgia gets you pretty far, but you got to do something innovative if we're going to keep this alive. And I thought, even more than The Last Jedi, I think Andor really proved that. And, I have very good Star Wars buddies who say it doesn't feel like Star Wars to me. And I respect that opinion because I can see that and I can understand that. But for me, Star Wars is about really looking at the lessons that a society needs. And I don't think I've been taught as much by a Star Wars product than I have been by Andor. And Andor is just always on my mind and always teaching me how to be a better person and how to think about others. Greg, you also stole my thunder because I just had a list of names, right?
Nemec.
Marva, Nemec, absolutely. Brasso, Mon Mothma, Deidre Miro, all of these are incredible characters. And, if I start a top 10 of my favorite Star Wars characters, I'll save it for another episode. I think it would be shocking how many Andor characters make it up there, considering how little they appear elsewhere and outside of this. And I think that is a credit to really good writing. I got the tip from the internet. I never checked it, but I was told if you started your rewatch on the Tuesday of the Skeleton Crew finale, you can watch one a week until Andor premieres and get your rewatch done. So it's early. People can catch up. But just those first couple episodes, there's this great moment where Cassian comes and he tells Brasso the story of what they did last night as his cover story. And Brasso responds by editing the story back. And I was like, that is just incredible writing. I know everything I need to know about those two characters and how much they are in sync and how much they love each other. And not a single silly, this is an exposition line was uttered. It was just perfect and beautiful. And all the other characters, Kino Loy, One Way Out. I made my soul a sunless place. Luthen later in it, like it's just incredible, and I will treasure Andor for always. It looks gorgeous on the 4Ks. I just have been cracking mine open in this rewatch, and it's really wonderful. So I recommend that.
I didn't know if you're going to put that one or Obi-Wan as your one. So
it was close.
Yes, fascinating. Well said. Also. Love it. Okay, Bob, you're number one.
Well, by process of elimination, people who are writing these all out know that for me, number one also is Andor. Agree with everything that you guys have said. Dr. Greg, I'm hoping if you guys are going to be in Tokyo, when they announced that Andor season 2 is going to come out like right after Celebration, I'm like, we better get at least the first episode to be able to watch all together as a group in Tokyo. So I hope that you guys can make it and that's there. You guys have said most of it, but like for me, the Aldhani heist was the best Star Wars movie since Return of the Jedi. Until the Narkina 5 jailbreak, and that was the best Star Wars movie since the Aldhani heist. I just thought that they were wonderful. It's been really fun for me because on my own show, I got two of the guys who work for me. It's great when you're the boss. You can be like, hey, you guys, be on my podcast for an extended amount of time. One of them who I talk with movies about all the time had not seen the sequels. And so we did a rewatch of the sequels. So he watched it for the first time and the other guy and I were rewatching it. So we recapped those and then we went into Andor. And it's been so fun rewatching them through his eyes, and he's just absolutely loving it as, both kind of a rookie Star Wars fan, but also as a lover of film. It works really well. I'm going to try to impress my English professor colleagues here. I was in Andui's Antigone when I was in high school. And ever since then, I think I have loved the idea of taking mythological characters and putting them into kind of realistic situations. And that's what I feel Andor did so well. I disagree with the argument that it didn't feel like of course, if they feel that way, it doesn't feel like Star Wars to them. That's great. To me, it doesn't break the laws of Star Wars. So therefore, it's Star Wars. So then taking characters and putting them in situations that might resonate a little bit more with a different set of people, to me, that just works really well. And that's the magic of Andor. The last comment is I don't know if I would have wanted them to put this in, but I do want to see the cut. I know they filmed the cut where Marva's hologram at the end does not say fight the Empire, but says a distinct, less family-friendly word. I would love to see that cut. That would have been mind-blowing had that happened. And I think they probably made the right decision by not going that way, but I still want to see it. So, Andor season 1.
Wow. So I will not be tying you all, but you all make really compelling arguments. For me, though, there's only one. It's The Mandalorian season 1. One of you mentioned, I think Bob, you mentioned like when you get the tags for these shows and you don't know what they're going to be, but you get this vague idea of a descriptor. I didn't really care. I've always liked the armor of Boba Fett more than I've actually liked the character of Boba Fett. It was going to be about a Mandalorian, and I knew that was a big thing for Dave, and I was like, okay, fine. I saw a glimpse of it at Celebration Chicago. Okay, that was sort of compelling. And then I watched that first episode after school in my classroom, and I was so riveted. And then at the end, when it was the reveal, more goosebumps, man. And it was this child version of Yoda. I couldn't believe it. It looked gorgeous. It just sucked me in. Every episode got better and better. We got to see live action Mandalorians fighting with jetpacks. We got to meet some new characters. And then Queel is one of the finest Star Wars characters that we've ever had the pleasure of getting to know. He was not long for us, but every time he was on screen, he packed a punch. I thought that Gina Carano's performance as Cara Dune was fabulous. I thought she was a great character in those first 2 seasons. And then the last couple of episodes and the payoff, you are now as this child's father. I've seen the first season of Mandalorian probably 35 times because I show it in mythology. And I pretty much know them by heart. And it has not diminished my love or affection for these shows. There's really not much else I can say that I avoid a lot of things I like. I barely watch them more than once or twice because I get oversaturated and it loses its magic and its luster for me. That has not happened with The Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2. I don't think that they ever will. Like you all said, I think if the first season didn't land the way that it did, we wouldn't have all this stuff. I'm glad that we do. I think they are fabulous characters. I think Grogu and Din Djarin are outstanding. And the moments I've had with Mason because of The Mandalorian and Grogu, I will always be grateful to Disney for providing me with that playground for he and I to play in. And I could not think more fondly of The Mandalorian season 1 because of that.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are, with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is... yes.
So normally we do an honorable mention. There aren't any. We've covered it all.
The whole gamut.
We've covered the whole gamut. And gentlemen, wow, this was fun. This was so much fun. I should have known that you would all make me appreciate the saga that I love so much even more. So thank you all for that. Greg, let's start with you. What is going on with the Rebel Base Card, and where can people find you?
Well, I can say what a great steam into Star Wars it was. And of course, like having, being on Coffee with Kenobi and a Hyperion Hub and being down there with Tom Gross and all you folks at Washington Community High School, I'm still kind of coming off that high, as well as Skeleton Crew, like Greg Cass and I had a great, set of breakfast packs. It was great. We're still going to probably be doing some, hot stove breakfast pack as we kind of gear up for Andor season 2. But it's the busy season for Greg Cass and the Long Take and Jen and all those folks, PT and whatnot. So I'm going to let him talk about that. But I got to let him kind of go for a bit because he's got a lot of movies to watch. But in the meantime, kind of trying to get some more sketch artists as, we've had a few Tops high-end releases. And I'm kind of gearing up for later this summer, hopefully going to London Film and Comic-Con. So kind of getting some hooks in to make a trip out to London. And, of course, Mark Newbold, who comes on the show every year, just what an incredible guest. And he allowed me to kind of, do some of the pool reviews for Skeleton Crew and to kind of like flex those writing muscles. It was really fun. And so looking to kind of do a little more of that. And, man, what a great year ahead. Because we have so much to kind of look forward to. So hopefully kind of being in there in a mix within some of your podcast playlists.
Absolutely. Well, we always look forward to seeing the Rebel Base Card show up. And Dr. Cass, not only are you, have the catchphrase for the breakfast packs, but you are very, very busy professionally and personally. Please let us know what's going on with you.
Well, I just want to say I'm so mad I resigned from Rebel Base Card just moments before he announced the trip to London. I'm going to miss out on that. Yeah. So it was a wonderful time covering Skeleton Crew, and I'm very much looking forward to Andor on that feed as well. And as Greg alluded to, my main hosting duties right now are over on Long Take Review. We are in the heat of the Oscar race now, and we're catching up on the releases we didn't see and the surprises. The latest episode that's available is our reaction to the Oscar nominations. And then we are recording this week to finally, because everybody else dragged their feet seeing it, but to finally record about A Complete Unknown, which is one of my top movies from last year. So it should be a good conversation. Thankfully, they all will either be nice to me and the movie or just be quiet and let me talk about James Mangold a little bit more. So it's always a pleasure to come on CWK. So thank you so much for having us on. And it really was a stimulating conversation. I think I could redo my list based on everything you all said and have totally different reasons in a totally different order.
Oh, likewise. Me too. Mm-hmm. And Bob, what a pleasure to have you on Coffee with Kenobi. You were wonderful as I absolutely expected. Please let us know what is going on with you and where people can find all of your great shows.
Thanks so much, Dan. It was a pleasure being here. So, for everybody in your audience who is in the corporate learning industry, or even if you're just a teacher of any kind, tune into the Learning Geeks podcast where we talk about how people learn. But Star Wars related, I invite everybody to join me on the newly rechristened Short for a Stormtrooper, a 15-minute Star Wars podcast. The idea being, I love all you guys' podcasts, but they go on for a little bit. And I only like to listen to podcasts when I'm like cleaning the kitchen and stuff, which takes about 15 minutes. So I made a podcast that you could listen to while you are cleaning the kitchen or doing whatever chore you want. So I invite everybody to join me. Just find your podcast app of choice and search for Short for a Stormtrooper, and you will find it there. Look me up at Star Wars Celebration in Tokyo, and look forward to meeting everybody soon.
Well, thank you, Bob, Dr. Cass, and Greg. I love speaking with all of you. It was a great show. Thank you again so much for sharing your time and talents with all of us.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here.